Так дайте пацанам посчитать потери. Суммы нули погибают на сцене. Снова один, прогуляюсь без тени. Заливаю лик, поцелуй на шее. Капли тамба, правый назад, черный каскад. Вижу твой взгляд, стель на гояр. Мог тебя взять, но ты не моя. Так дайте пацанам посчитать потери. Суммы нули погибают на сцене. Снова один, прогуляюсь без тени. Заливаю лик, поцелуй на шее. Капли тамба, правый назад, черный каскад. Вижу твой взгляд, стель на гояр. Мог тебя взять, но ты не моя. Эти понты покупались во рту, твои мозги затупились к утру. Так дайте пацанам посчитать потери. Суммы нули погибают на сцене. Снова один, прогуляюсь без тени. Заливаю лик, поцелуй на шее. Капли тамба, правый назад, черный каскад. Вижу твой взгляд, стель на гояр. Мог тебя взять, но ты не моя. Так дайте пацанам посчитать потери. Суммы нули погибают на сцене. Снова один, прогуляюсь без тени. Заливаю лик, поцелуй на шее. Капли тамба, правый назад, черный каскад. Вижу твой взгляд, стель на гояр. Мог тебя взять, но ты не моя. Так дайте пацанам посчитать потери. Суммы нули погибают на сцене. Снова один, прогуляюсь без тени. Заливаю лик, поцелуй на шее. Капли тамба, правый назад, черный каскад. Вижу твой взгляд, стель на гояр. Мог тебя взять, но ты не моя. Так дайте пацанам посчитать потери. Суммы нули погибают на сцене. Снова один, прогуляюсь без тени. Заливаю лик, поцелуй на шее. Капли тамба, правый назад, черный каскад. Вижу твой взгляд, стель на гояр. Мог тебя взять, но ты не моя.
So I have a question. This is a dumb American question. I got a lot of these. I want to talk about immigration. You know, we are having this terrible immigration crisis here at our southern border. We're getting overrun. And you asked me earlier if I'd been to Canada, and I have several times. And every single time I went to Canada, it was a long, long ordeal at the border. Being an American, not being a Canadian citizen, they wanted to know everything about me, all my papers, all my identification. They had to know if I was coming in for work, which I was. They had to see a copy of my signed contract. And then they called the employer who hired me to make sure they were real employers, a real contract. This took hours. And they searched the vehicle completely. I mean, with a fine-tooth comb. They went through our devices. They gave us the what for. It was about a 10-hour ordeal almost every time.
10 hours?
I kid you not. I kid you not. And we almost didn't get in the country because one of the people in our traveling party had a arrest on their record for possession of a small amount of marijuana down in Texas in like 1976. And they were going to deny him entrance to the country because of that. He was a dangerous criminal. So in other words, you guys seem to do your due diligence at the border. You don't just let anybody in. I mean, tell me about
Yes, we do.
Canadian immigration and
Yes, we
why. Do you have that same problem? Because that wasn't my experience.
Depends on who you are
What do you mean?
and what you are. Well, I don't know if we should get into it too much, but tonight. But Trudeau has a pro-immigration policy. If you there's a place called Roxham Road, it's on the border. We have irregular immigrants, as they like to call them now, instead of illegal. They just cross over, and the RCMP helps them carry their bags. You know, it's
they're coming in from America.
Yeah, but from other points too, right? Like they end up there, but they're crossing over at that point. Yeah. If you're a Canadian, they don't want you back.
Interesting.
And it doesn't matter what your skin color is or any of that. If you're Canadian, you get the third degree. If you're not Canadian and you don't have a passport and you just claim refugee status, I think then it's like, well, what hotel can we book for you?
Come on in.
Well, I mean, I'm exaggerating, right? But I don't know. The border is not the same as it used to be. You know, I so miss the freedom that we used to have. I don't know if you ever crossed the border back in the days of just show your driver's license.
No.
No?
Well, actually, yes. Before you had to have a passport to go to Canada. Yeah, I've gone across the border several times before that was put into place.
Yeah. And prior to 9/11, it was just like, oh, you pull up and where are you going? Oh, going over that way. Okay, here's my driver's license. Okay, see ya. That was about it.
Well, of course, you're Canadian, though. I mean,
yeah, but
they looked at us like we were potential terrorists. And this is before 9/11. We had to tell them our whole life story.
Well, you know,
things show a lot of papers.
Yeah, they got tighter and tighter over time. And then when passports became mandatory, then you got the Nexus Pass for people who lived on the border and would cross the border to work every day, say from Windsor to Detroit.
Yeah.
There were provisions like that made, but it's just progressively become more and more difficult to cross for everyone.
So why don't we do that? That's my point. What is Joe Biden doing here? The day he took office, he just flung it open on the southern border. And
again, on your side, invaded. I think it depends on who you are, because I've been detained on the U.S. side a few times. Just secondary, sit there. I almost missed a flight. The only reason I didn't miss the flight is because the flight was late by hours. They took my phone on the U.S. side. They cloned it. They took me into a back room. They were quizzing me. They had a whole team of customs people, immigration people. One guy was on a computer. They were asking me all these questions. And when I was giving them the answers, he was typing stuff into the computer to see if he could find information, to see if I was telling the truth. And if I was, he was nodding at the guy, yes. And I was picking up on this. I had nothing to hide. In the end, I'll tell you this, you can trust me. You know why? Because those guys do. You know why? Because they knew everything about me, every single freaking thing. They knew what was on my phone, what websites I'd visited. They knew what movies I like to watch, what books I read, what websites I went to, all the work I've done. They knew my life history, where I've lived, everything that they could possibly find out about me. They knew from that. And they have a record of my phone. They know all about me. Now, I've had RCMP clearance before, too. When I had to cover the Queen, I had to get, thoroughly checked out by the RCMP. Those guys trust me, too. That's not saying much, mind you, these days, right? But back in those days, that was something. Well, yeah, so I've had that on the U.S. side as well. I think it just depends on, who you are, what you're doing, and how much pity they take upon you.
Or what color your skin is. Sometimes I
I don't
wonder
know.
about that, if they screen us white folks even harder.
I think
Honestly.
sometimes they do because, you know, you have means, you have money, you have a job, you're suspect. What are you doing coming over here? You're a Canadian. Why are you coming over? Why do you need to work over here? Because that's
Mhm.
what it was, right? I was going over to work as a journalist,
Same.
and and then they're like, well, you know, wait a minute, do you have this HB1 form thing you got to fill out? And you know, and I'm like, well, I'm working as a journalist, and you know, these provisions provide for that, and then you just get pulled over, and then the next thing you know, you're there for hours.
Hours and
Yeah,
hours and
yeah.
hours. Yeah. I learned the hard way after the first time I tried to cross into Canada that you better show up a good 12 hours before you need to be to your destination, because this is going to take forever. And it's so intrusive, isn't it? You've experienced it
Hmm.
yourself. You know, you came to
Oh
the
yeah.
United States and they gave you the third degree.
Well, on the one occasion, I was so thoroughly checked. I thought, my God, I wonder if I've done anything
Right.
that
Have
they
I
could
done
possibly,
something?
have I done anything that they could get upset with me about or charge me with? Have I done anything? Have I been to a website that maybe I shouldn't have been to, or anything at all? Right. In the end, after hours of this, uh, no big deal. And
And then
and
you're
away
just
I
free
went.
to go and they
Yeah.
don't even apologize for making
Uh,
you late.
no, but you know what? When it was funny, not funny, but when I was finally freed to go, the one officer, he was like, how can I put it? He was kind of like, "You're okay." It
You
was
know,
like,
you're all right.
you're a pretty good guy, you know, because we thoroughly, and I really like you
Well, you are.
because we really checked you out, and I think you're not a bad guy. You're a pretty good guy. You have a nice trip. It was kind of like
Okay.
that. It was like he came to respect me after thoroughly checking me out. And I didn't lie about a single thing, and everything I said was true, even though some of the stuff I said probably sounded like I was nuts. You know, some of the media work that I'd done, and they're like, "Yeah, right." That was what I was getting. They're like, "Yeah, sure you did. Oh yeah, sure you do. Right. You go over there, nut bar."
No kidding. They're gonna check you out on the
You're
internet,
gonna
if you're
check me
really,
out for
really a
sure.
reporter, as you
Yep.
say you are.
Yep. Well, you know,
I wonder if they watch you now.
I
Maybe you
covered
made
the
some fans.
queen once. I covered the queen, and I covered the president one time. I was like, and we had like a pool feed, and yeah, sure you did.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're
They don't even know what
schizophrenic.
that
You're
is. What is it?
schizophrenic. You go to that line.
I don't know. I think you got an honest face, Rick.
Yeah, till I start talking, then they don't believe me.
That's when it all goes wrong. Yeah.
That's right. It was like, you're a freaking nut bar. You see what I'm saying? And then when I'm out talking to people, I'm like, I don't know. I think my friend might be a little bit misguided. Meanwhile, they're looking at me like he's delusional.
I hope they at least gave you some coffee and donuts or something to tide you over
Mm-mm.
while you're sitting there for 10 hours,
Nope.
having every
Nope.
aspect of your life examined under a microscope.
No, I've been grilled. I've been raked over the coals by Canada Customs. So Canada Customs is worse, I think.
Yeah,
I
I'd
think
have
they're
to
worse.
agree. Of all the
Yeah.
countries I visited, Canada was intense. I
Didn't
had no
used to
trouble getting
be.
into Mexico. I'll tell you
Yeah.
that.
Me either.
Yeah, Mexico was super easy. As a Texan, Texans go back and forth across the border all the time. Take a little
Cuba.
vacation down there.
Yeah. You haven't been to Cuba, right?
No.
I've been to
No.
Cuba. I don't like it.
You've been to Cuba?
Oh yeah.
Why
I
did you
don't.
go, I wonder?
Well, Canadians go to Cuba all the time for vacation. It's not, you see, because we're
Oh, that's
Canadian.
still a thing in Canada.
Oh yeah.
Hasn't been here
Yeah.
for about 60 years.
Yeah, that's right.
Mhm.
So yeah, I went to Cuba, but I did not like Cuba. I'll tell you why I didn't like Cuba. Do you want to hear, or do you want to
Yes,
move on
I
to
do.
others?
Tell me. I've always been curious to visit Cuba, actually.
You know, the United States has its problems, right? No question. but I love the United States. When I got off the plane in Cuba and I was walking through the airport, you were just constantly bombarded with anti-American propaganda. The stores in the, the shops in the airport, instantly, like books, all anti-American books with, the covers about how evil America is.
Was this during the Castro presidency, I presume? Fidel was still in power?
No, his brother was in power, right? I think he'd passed away. So he might have been alive. I can't remember. Because I went there. I don't remember what year it was. Anyway, point is, anti-American propaganda everywhere. I didn't like it. I didn't like Cuba because it was Cuba, right? I have to keep my trips straight. I think it's Cuba where you have to change your money, and they charge you a fee, and it's like, what the heck was it? They basically rob you because you're not supposed to use foreign currency. You're supposed to use this certain currency that's just for tourists. And you pay a premium price for it. You're not buying their currency at the market rate. You're buying it at an inflated rate. So you end up paying more because you're not Cuban, because you're Canadian or a Westerner, right?
You're being penalized for that, huh?
So I didn't like that. Because there were stupid fees associated with it. That's what it was too. When you leave, you have to pay a fee to get out of the country. To leave, you have to pay them. And if you don't, there's a penalty for that, like jail or something. It was a long time ago when I went, but that really turned me off. You had to pay it or you weren't getting out of Cuba. It was like they're holding you ransom for your own release. Didn't like that at all. And when I was there, I noticed something about Cuba with their television stations, their television lineup. There were American stations available. Not all of them, not where I was at the resort. Some American stations on their system, a lot of Canadian stations, a lot. Very prominent. Canadian television featured prominently, and they were running anti-American documentaries 24/7 on TV. I didn't like that at all. The people, incredibly friendly. We were warned, like, don't go here, don't go over there. When you leave if you leave the resort, you stay in this area and be careful. But I didn't really have any trouble. I always hear warnings like that. Even if I used to go over, when I lived in Windsor, I used to go to Detroit all the time. And people would say, well, don't go to Detroit, you'll get shot. And I was like, but I like Detroit. And then I used to go just check out some of the worst, roughest places in Detroit just because I wanted
Detroit
to check
gets
it out.
rough, baby.
Yeah.
Rough.
But I never had any trouble. I went over there. I've done photo shoots and, burned out buildings and stuff like that. And I never had any trouble. Lots of people approach me and talk to them and stuff. But yeah, I've done a lot of stuff in Detroit. But Cuba, no ketchup. It was hard to get ketchup. They have things. Yeah, they have all the trappings at the resort of like an upscale sort of place, but there were just things missing. And you knew when you were there that the people, the citizens, were suffering because they didn't have enough ketchup at the resort. They just things like that. They just had shortage of. You'd go into there was soap in your room, but if you went to the public restrooms, no soap.
How weird.
Like they just didn't have enough, right? Just things like that. They had. You could get Coke at some of the stores, but on the resort and most places, you had to drink like this Cuban version of Coca-Cola because some American brands were in short supply. Just I just didn't like it. It was too communistic for me. All the Canadians that were there loved it. But you know me, I'm a freedom guy. Right. And I could see that it wasn't really a free place. And the Canadians who were there were getting the resort experience, and they weren't really cluing in to the things that I was focused on. And I didn't like it. You go down to the beach, people, you know, the local people would wander onto the beach, and then they would try to sell you stuff, and then the security would come and chase them away. I didn't like that. But some of the local people were approved, and they could perform services like massages on the beach or selling you seashell necklaces, or certain people were allowed, but the rest of them they would chase away. It was, you know, made me feel uncomfortable. When I go, I don't generally leave resorts like that because I just want to forget about everything. I don't really want to go sightseeing. I don't even really want to immerse myself in the culture, to be quite honest. I just want to go sit on the beach and just, that's it. Like, I'm on this spot.
That's why you're there. It's a vacation.
Leave me alone. I don't even want to talk to anybody. I just want to sit here and bake. That's it. I'm just going to sit right there, and I'm not going to move for a week. But when I was there, I was immersed in some of the culture, and I didn't care for it, particularly at the airport. But
you know, I would be very curious to see what that's like. As an American, you know, we've had this long-standing war with Cuba pretty much ever since Castro came to power in 1959. And we get heavily propagandized about Cuba and about evil Castro. You know, he's a serial killer like Putin. We got that shit all through the Cold War, and everything about Cuba was bad. Everything about Cuba was evil. And yeah, on their side, they're propagandizing their people too. Yeah. And when you look at the history of this relationship between Cuba and the United States, certainly since Castro's regime came to power, they have their reasons for feeling that the way that they do. You know, America has always tried to dominate Cuba one way or the other, going back 100 years or more. We were not happy when we lost all that business in Cuba, when Castro nationalized everything and refused, you know, we refused to do business with Cuba. They refused to do business with us. And we tried to invade Cuba. There were literally plans to send the United States Army and Marines into Cuba in 1962. We were going to send 250,000 troops in there and try to take that island back from Castro. Fortunately, the Kennedy administration pulled the plug on that because it would be an unprovoked war of aggression. We had no reason to invade this country, but there was a plan for it. There was a contingency plan for it. And of course, we tried to do it at the Bay of Pigs. And then we find ourselves toe-to-toe with the Ruskies in the Cuban Missile Crisis because Castro quite rightly felt threatened by the United States' aggression. And he radioed to Khrushchev. He says, help me out here. If they invade me, I've got to have something to defend my island with. That's why those missiles were placed into Cuba. President Kennedy at least had the ability to step into the other guy's shoes, even if you don't agree with the other guy. He looked at it from Castro's point of view, from Khrushchev's point of view, and said, if I were in his shoes, how would I feel when the United States does X or Y? So all I'm saying is the Cuban people kind of have their reasons to not trust the United States. We haven't really given them any reason to trust us.
It was 2014 when I did this piece on the cars of Cuba. There
it is.
You know what I found distasteful when I was there as well?
What's that?
Most of the people are driving. There were like some imported cars that were newer. A lot of people are driving older pieces of crap. And then you'd see some guy drive by in like a Mercedes AMG something or other, just some $100,000 US luxury sports car.
Oh, I thought all they had were the old junkers down there.
Well, yeah. Well, yeah, there's a lot of that. And then you get these guys. I can't remember what this story was exactly, but here, let me just roll a little bit of this.
Yeah, let's see this.
Because these cab drivers, I also felt for them. I didn't like what they were doing to the cab drivers.
Savannah?
Not all of the old iron on the roads of Cuba is American. Russian Ladas are also very common, like this 1989 Lada taxi operated by Roberto. Most of the vehicles look a bit beat up, well, a lot beat up actually, and most could use a good tune-up, but tourists love them. Like many of the old American cars on the road, Manuel's has been updated with a Hyundai diesel engine to take advantage of Cuba's much lower diesel fuel prices. Manuel's old Cadillac is still owned by the government, but he is allowed to rent it so he can run his own taxi business. A handful of taxi drivers are allowed to own and operate their taxis as independent drivers. The tips from tourists make driving a cab one of the best paying jobs available in Cuba. The U.S. embargo is still in place, and there is obviously still tension between the U.S. and Cuba, but this old international school bus being used to transport U.S. exchange students around the Cuban countryside and steps toward economic reform are the first signs in decades that Cold War tensions may finally be slowly thawing. 1.5 million Canadians visit Cuba every year. Millions more arrive from Russia, Germany, and other parts of Europe annually. Political ideology aside, the American classics on the roads of Cuba have now become a cultural staple and a huge asset for the country's rapidly expanding tourism industry. This year, our SST.
Anyway. So those are the cars of Cuba. 2014. That's when I was down there.
Boy, that report from Cuba was super cool. I love those old cars anyway, but what the heck was with the Beatles statue? Where was that? That was interesting.
That was a little restaurant. It was sort of a Beatles themed thing. They love the Beatles down there. Yeah. I think the Beatles had been there, so that's why they had the statue there.
That is fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
I noticed the weirdest things. I love that.
Yeah.
Good reporting.
2014. And the technology has changed so much since then. You notice that it was like it wasn't full screen because back then we were still broadcasting that on television in standard definition.
Right.
So, yeah, even the video looks a little bit washed out now, right? But that was cutting edge technology at the time.
That's really
cool.
Just
in 2014. Yeah.
I enjoy the SST show, actually. I checked out a couple episodes. I love my cars.
And finally this week, the Spiritus, something a little bit different from Canadian-based Daymac, which is known for importing and distributing e-bikes, which sell for about $1,000. Well, now they're getting into the car game with the Spiritus, a three-wheeled vehicle that will become the world's fastest three-wheeled electric vehicle. It will accelerate from 0 to 60 in just 1.8 seconds. This is being crowdfunded. It will go into production in 2023, and the price will range from about $20,000 for the deluxe model to $150,000 for the ultimate Spiritus. Well, friends, that's all the time we have this week. So until next time, I'm Rick Walker reminding you, when you can't get to the car show, we'll bring the car show to you online at SSTcarshow.com.